Good to see you in a new video on Betrayal Wife Tales. Today I'm going to tell you an interesting story of our subscriber.
It was one of those summer days where everything seemed brighter than usual, and everyone was just a little too happy. I'd been at a work event, a picnic that my boss thought would be great for team morale, and I was eager to get home. The sun was setting by the time I got back, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and called out, "Laura, I'm home," but was met with silence. Laura, my wife, had been acting strange lately. Married for 6 years, I thought I knew her like the back of my hand. She was always outgoing and friendly, the type to light up a room when she walked in. But over the last month, I'd noticed a change. She seemed distant. I shrugged it off as stress from her new job at the marketing firm. Still, something in the pit of my stomach felt wrong. That evening, after we ate, Laura told me she had a networking event the next day. I didn't think much of it. Her new job meant more socializing, which I figured was good for her career. But her tone was odd, too casual, like she was covering up something. And yet, I brushed it off. Maybe it was just paranoia from the past month of weird vibes, but I wasn't about to start accusing her out of the blue. The next evening, I was restless. She was out at her networking event, and I was trying to distract myself with a movie, but it didn't work. I ended up texting her, just a casual, "Hope you're having a good time" message. I waited, but no reply. I sighed, telling myself she was probably caught up in a conversation. A couple of hours later, I heard the door open. I went to greet her, but she looked different. Her hair was slightly tousled, and her makeup looked smudged, as if she'd been wiping away smudges in a hurry. She looked startled to see me up, but quickly plastered on a smile. "How was the event?" I asked. "Oh, it was fine," she replied, setting her bag on the table a little too quickly. "Just some boring networking stuff." The unease I'd been feeling solidified a bit more. I tried not to press her, but I found myself watching her every move. Her laugh seemed forced, her glances around the room too casual. As the days passed, her behavior grew stranger. Texts that came late at night, calls she stepped away to take. And then, one afternoon, I got a call from a friend of mine, Mark, who happened to work in the same building as her new job. "Hey, man, I thought I saw Laura today," Mark said, "but she was with this guy, looked pretty cozy." I wasn't going to mention it, but something seemed off. "You two okay?" I froze, feeling a prickling sense of dread. After that call, I couldn't sit still. I spent the evening replaying everything in my head, questioning every late night, every quick excuse, every forced smile. I knew I needed to confront her, but I wasn't sure how to bring it up without sounding paranoid or controlling. The idea of hiring a private investigator flashed through my mind, but I dismissed it. This was my wife, my Laura. The thought alone made me feel guilty. I decided I would give her the benefit of the doubt, at least until I could be sure. The next morning, I decided to take an unexpected day off from work. I made up a story about a maintenance issue at home to excuse my absence, but the real reason was that I wanted to see what Laura was up to without her knowing. I wanted to catch a glimpse of her day, see if my suspicions had any foundation, or if I was spiraling for nothing. Laura left for work around 9 a.m. as usual, dressed in a sharp, fitted suit I hadn't seen before. She seemed more put together than usual, almost like she was dressing up for someone. My heart sank as I watched her leave, but I shook off the creeping doubt and followed her car from a distance. She pulled up at her office building, just like every other day. I waited in a nearby coffee shop, pretending to work on my laptop, while anxiously glancing at the building across the street. After a few hours, I started to feel foolish. Nothing was happening, and Laura was simply going about her day as far as I could tell. But then, around noon, she came out of the building. She wasn't alone. A tall man with dark hair and a polished look was beside her. He had one of those charming, easygoing smiles, and he was clearly more than a co-worker. I watched as Laura laughed, leaning into him in a way that felt way too familiar. She reached out and touched his arm as they walked down the street together, her face lit up with an expression I hadn't seen in months. I felt my stomach twist as I watched them turn a corner. I followed, keeping a safe distance. They walked together into a small restaurant nearby, one of those quiet places with dim lighting and private booths. I waited outside, my chest tight and my mind racing. Every fiber of my being told me to go in and confront them, to demand answers, but something held me back. After an hour, they finally left the restaurant, walking so close their arms brushed together with every step. I took out my phone, snapping a quick picture of them as they laughed together. It felt surreal, as if I was watching a stranger. I had never felt so helpless, watching my wife walk away with another man like it was the most natural thing in the world. That night, when she got home, I could barely look at her. She was smiling, humming a song to herself, her mood almost annoyingly cheerful. She kissed my cheek, and I stiffened, forcing myself not to recoil. I had never felt that way toward her before, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. "How was your day?" she asked, setting her bag down as she moved around the kitchen. I forced a casual tone. "Same old, nothing special." "How was yours?" "Oh, you know, meetings, deadlines. The usual," she replied with a shrug, as if she hadn't spent her lunch break cozied up to another man. I watched her closely, looking for any signs of guilt, any indication that she knew I was onto her. But she was calm, collected, almost like she was living a double life without a second thought. I couldn't keep it in any longer. "So, do you and your new friend from work hang out often?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She froze for just a split second, barely noticeable, but I caught it. Her eyes flickered, and she forced a laugh. "Who?" "Oh, you mean Greg." She smiled, waving it off. "He's just a colleague. We had lunch because he's working on a project with me." No big deal. But it was a big deal. Her casual dismissal only fueled the anger brewing inside me. No big deal. I replayed that line in my head over and over, each time feeling more absurd. I wanted to scream, to demand to know what this Greg had that I didn't, but I forced myself to keep calm. I knew she was lying, yet I couldn't let her know I was onto her. Not yet. I spent the next few days in a haze, thinking through what to do next. It was impossible to focus on anything but her betrayal and the thought of her with that other man. Each time I tried to talk to her about her day, I could tell she was only sharing the safe parts, conversations with co-workers, a stressful email, an upcoming deadline. She gave me the highlights, just enough to make it sound like nothing was wrong, like everything was perfectly fine. But on Friday night, Laura surprised me. She mentioned a last-minute work trip that her boss had asked her to attend. It was only a few hours away, a one-night stay at a hotel, she said, with some big clients her team was hoping to land. Her voice was even, confident, like she'd rehearsed this lie. I watched her pack her suitcase with a sickening sense of dread, knowing full well that this was no work trip. Before she left, she hugged me a little too tightly, kissed me a little too deeply. I felt like I was holding a stranger in my arms. Her scent lingered long after she was gone, and I sat in the quiet house, wondering what to do next. There was no way I was just going to sit there, helpless, while she spent the night with him. So I decided to follow her. I waited about 30 minutes, letting her get far enough ahead that she wouldn't notice me, and then I took off, driving the same route she had mentioned to her hotel. After an hour on the road, I finally spotted her car in the lot of a small hotel off the highway. I parked at a distance and watched as she got out, suitcase in hand, and walked toward the entrance. My stomach churned as I watched her disappear inside, knowing I couldn't follow without being seen. After some time, a black SUV pulled up, and out stepped Greg. He strolled casually, no luggage, just a backpack slung over one shoulder. He moved through the doors and out of sight. My blood boiled. For the next hour, I waited, heart pounding, staring at the glow of the hotel lobby, trying to figure out my next move. I was furious, devastated, and felt like the ground was crumbling beneath me. Then, almost on impulse, I got out of the car and walked toward the entrance. The clerk at the front desk looked up with a friendly smile as I approached. My mind raced, desperate to think of a way to get the information I needed. I leaned in, acting as casual as I could manage, and said, "Hey, my wife's staying here tonight, but her phone's dead. I just need to drop something off. Could you tell me which room she's in?" The clerk hesitated, eyeing me curiously. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't give out that information. Hotel policy." I forced a laugh, trying to look relaxed. "I understand. Just figured I'd try my luck. Thanks anyway." I left the front desk. I was on the verge of leaving when I noticed a nearby conference room labeled Event Room B. It looked like a large reception hall, with windows facing the courtyard. The lights were dimmed, but there was just enough visibility to see the back patio area, secluded by a thick line of trees. I glanced around, then walked outside, crouching down to see if I could get a look into the building. I could only make out a few details, but it was enough. There, by the window, was Laura. She was laughing, her head thrown back, as Greg leaned in close. They looked like they were sharing some secret joke, the kind that only two people intimately close would understand. A chill ran through me as I realized the depth of their deception. I stood there, hidden in the shadows, feeling like a ghost watching his own life unravel. The image of Laura with Greg, laughing, leaning into him, their faces just inches apart, was seared into my mind. I felt anger rising like a storm within me, stronger than I'd ever known. I forced myself to pull back, taking deep breaths to keep from storming inside and confronting them right then and there. My heart pounded as I went back to my car, trying to gather my thoughts. I couldn't let rage take over. I needed a plan. Bursting in would only give them an excuse to turn this on me, to claim I'd lost control, or overreacted. No, I needed proof. Something irrefutable, something they couldn't deny. I remembered, I had my camera in the car from a recent camping trip. It had a decent zoom, good enough to capture them from a distance. I pulled it out and walked back to the edge of the courtyard, crouching behind some shrubs where I had a clear view of the patio. It was dark, but the glow from the room gave just enough light. They were close, too close for colleagues. Laura was smiling, her hand resting lightly on Greg's arm, fingers tracing a path up his sleeve. He leaned in, whispering something in her ear that made her blush and look away, laughing in that soft, coy way she used to laugh with me. My grip tightened on the camera as I snapped a few shots, my heart sinking with each click. I watched them talk for what felt like an eternity, until finally, Laura stood up. Greg followed her out of the room, and I held my breath, watching as they walked down the hall toward the elevators. I was too far to hear what they were saying, but I saw enough. I followed them at a safe distance, heart pounding in my chest as they disappeared into an elevator. My mind screamed at me to stop, to turn away, but I couldn't. When the elevator doors closed, I caught the floor number 7. I ran up the stairs, not wanting to risk running into them in the hallway. When I got to the 7th floor, I crept down the hallway, looking for a sign of them. As I rounded a corner, I caught a glimpse of Laura slipping into a room, Greg close behind her. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the empty hallway. I stood there, stunned, feeling as if time had frozen. My mind raced as I fought the urge to bang on the door, to scream, to demand answers. But I knew I had to stay calm. I couldn't let them know I'd been here. Instead, I snapped a photo of the door, the room number clearly visible, and turned to leave. Back in my car, I stared blankly at the photos on my camera screen. The evidence was right there, undeniable, and yet I felt numb, like I was outside my own body. I drove home in silence, replaying every moment of the night over and over in my mind. I barely slept, the images of Laura and Greg haunting me every time I closed my eyes. The next morning, she came home, looking refreshed, like she'd had the best night's sleep. She walked in with a smile, greeted me with a kiss as if nothing had happened. I could barely look at her, but I forced myself to play along, acting like I had no idea. "Did you sleep well?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Yeah, the hotel was nice. You know, work stuff can be so exhausting," she said with a laugh, clearly oblivious to my knowledge. "But I'm glad to be home." For the next few days, I went through the motions, pretending to believe her lies. But deep down, a plan was forming. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. I needed something that would make sure she couldn't turn the tables, something that would ensure that, once I exposed her betrayal, there would be no coming back from it. This wasn't just about catching her in a lie. It was about making her face the full weight of her choices. I spent the next few days researching. I knew that if I wanted to get a confession, or at least undeniable proof, I needed to be strategic. My mind kept circling back to one idea: hidden cameras. They made discreet devices now, small enough to be concealed in everyday objects. It felt strange, even wrong, to set up surveillance in my own home, but I knew I had to do it. Laura and Greg were too careful in public. If they met here, there would be no more hiding. The cameras arrived a few days later, disguised as ordinary items: an alarm clock, a charging dock, even a picture frame. I placed them around the house in spots that wouldn't look suspicious, but would give me a clear view of our living room, bedroom, and the hallway near the front door. By now, Laura's patterns had become obvious to me. She'd leave for work, come home at the usual time, but every so often, she'd tell me she had work meetings that ran late. The next time, she told me she had to stay late. I felt that familiar sting of anger, but I swallowed it down, knowing that this was my chance to see if she would bring him here. That Friday, she left for one of her meetings, kissing me goodbye, saying she wouldn't be back until late. I watched her drive away, keeping my face neutral, knowing I'd be seeing her lies exposed soon enough. Once she was gone, I sat down with my laptop, connecting it to the camera feed. I could see everything in real time, every angle covered. It wasn't long before I saw her car pull back into the driveway, and my heart hammered as I watched her step out, followed by Greg. She let him into the house, looking over her shoulder, clearly trying to be discreet. My jaw clenched as I watched them on the screen. They walked into the living room, talking and laughing, more like a couple than just colleagues. I watched as she poured them both glasses of wine, the two of them settling in on the couch. Her body language was relaxed, comfortable, as if she had done this 100 times. I watched as he leaned in, brushing a strand of hair from her face before pulling her close. I clenched my fists, my heart pounding as I watched her return his kiss, laughing softly as they pulled away. The scene felt surreal, like a twisted version of my own life, with someone else living it in my place. But then, as I continued to watch, something happened that shifted everything. Greg pulled out his phone, scrolling through something before holding it up for Laura to see. She looked at it, her smile fading slightly, and nodded, taking his phone in her hands. She began typing something, glancing nervously at the door every few seconds, almost like she was hiding something even from him. I squinted, trying to make out what they were talking about. Then, Greg's voice broke through as he laughed and said, "If he knew what was going on, he'd lose it. But he's clueless, isn't he? Poor guy." She laughed, and my blood turned to ice. But what she said next was even worse. "Oh, Mike doesn't have a clue," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Sometimes, I wonder if he even cares enough to notice. But, hey, as long as he keeps that paycheck coming, I'm not complaining." She laughed again, leaning into him. The bitterness in her voice cut deeper than any physical blow. It wasn't just an affair. It was cruelty, a kind of contempt I hadn't seen in her before. This wasn't just a lapse in judgment. This was a betrayal so complete that it left me feeling hollow. The woman I loved, the one I thought I knew, was mocking me, treating me like I was nothing more than a paycheck, a convenience. They eventually moved to the bedroom, and I turned off the feed. I couldn't watch anymore. I felt like everything inside me was shattering, the weight of her words crushing whatever part of me had still hoped this could somehow be salvaged. But then a new thought entered my mind. I'd caught them on camera. I had the proof I needed, but I wanted more than that. I wanted her to feel the same pain, the same betrayal. I wanted her to understand what she'd done, to face the consequences in a way that she'd never forget. A plan started forming, a way to turn her own lies against her. I would make sure that, by the time I was done, Laura would know exactly what she'd thrown away, and she'd regret every second of it. Over the next few days, I prepared. I copied the footage from the hidden cameras to a secure folder, and saved multiple backups on a USB drive and online storage. I had everything ready, down to the last detail, and my plan was crystal clear. I'd watched Laura play her game of deceit and disrespect, but now it was my turn to deal the final hand. The night came quickly. I told Laura I'd be out late with a friend, using the same vague excuse she'd given me countless times. As I left, I took one last look at her, feeling a strange, calm finality as I walked out the door. I knew I'd never look at her the same way again. An hour later, I returned. The house was quiet, and I could see the glow of her bedside lamp as I walked through the door. I took a deep breath, bracing myself, and walked into our bedroom. Laura looked up, surprised to see me back so soon. I didn't give her time to react. "We need to talk, Laura," I said, my voice calm but firm. She looked at me, a flicker of something, nervousness, maybe, crossing her face. She tried to laugh it off. "What's wrong, Mike? You look serious." I held her gaze. "I know about you and Greg. I know everything." Her face paled instantly, and I could see her fighting to keep her composure. What are you talking about?" She laughed nervously, but her voice trembled. Without a word, I pulled out my phone and played the video of her and Greg in our living room, her laughter, her taunts about me and my paycheck. I watched as her face shifted from disbelief to horror, her eyes widening as she realized I'd seen it all. "You thought I was clueless, that I didn't care enough to notice," I said, repeating her own words back to her. "Turns out, I was watching all along." She was silent, her eyes wide with shock, her hands trembling. "Mike, I can explain." "Explain?" I snapped, the anger finally breaking through. "Explain what, Laura?" "That you've been lying to me, mocking me, treating me like some convenient paycheck." Tears welled up in her eyes as she reached for me, but I stepped back. "Please, Mike, just let me explain." I was confused. I made a mistake. "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice hard. "A mistake is one bad decision, maybe two. But this was a calculated betrayal. You knew exactly what you were doing." She sank onto the bed, her face in her hands, her voice a broken whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen. I thought you'd moved on, that you didn't care anymore. I let out a bitter laugh. No, Laura. I cared more than you ever realized. You were the one who stopped caring, not me. There was a long silence, and I could see the reality sinking in for her. She finally looked up, her eyes filled with desperation. Please, Mike, give me another chance. I'll do anything. I shook my head slowly. You had your chance, Laura. And you threw it away. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope that held the divorce papers I'd already filed. I tossed it onto the bed beside her, watching as she opened it, her face crumbling as she realized what it was. No. Mike, please, don't do this, she sobbed, her hands gripping the papers like she could somehow undo everything by holding onto them. I'll be moving out tonight, I said, my voice steady. I've already packed. I'm done, Laura. She was crying openly now, her face a mess of regret and shock. I turned away, feeling an odd sense of relief, like I was finally breaking free from the weight of her lies. As I walked out the door, I heard her call my name one last time, her voice broken, pleading. But I didn't turn back. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild. It wasn't easy. There were days where the weight of it all felt unbearable, where I questioned how everything had gone so wrong. But each day, I felt a little stronger, a little freer. Word got around quickly about the divorce, and it wasn't long before I heard that Greg had left Laura as soon as she tried to make their relationship public. He'd moved on, just as easily as he'd moved into my life, leaving her to pick up the pieces. I didn't feel sorry for her. She'd made her choices, and now she was paying the price. The final act of my plan was the hardest part, but it was necessary. I sent the video and copies of the photos to Laura's family, to let them know the real reason for the divorce. I wasn't about to let her twist the story to make herself look innocent. Her reputation shattered, and she had to face the consequences of her betrayal. In the end, I walked away, knowing I'd taken back control of my life. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe, like I could finally move forward without the shadow of her lies hanging over me. Laura had gambled everything, thinking I'd never notice, never care. But she'd underestimated me. And in the end, she was the one who lost it all.